Nour jolted awake, heart pounding. The air in her bedroom was eerily cold, an unnatural chill that sent goosebumps crawling up her arms. She glanced at the window shut, the fan off, yet the cold wrapped around her like unseen fingers. Something felt wrong. She sat up slowly, straining to hear through the silence. The darkness felt heavier, pressing in from all corners of the room. A faint creak echoed from the far side, near her dresser. Nour's breath hitched. Was it just the wood settling, or something else? Then she noticed it, the mirror, uncovered, but she had draped it before bed. Nour's pulse quickened. The antique mirror stood tall in the corner, its golden frame glinting under the dim glow of the streetlight outside. The fabric cover lay crumpled on the floor beside it. She swallowed hard. Had she forgotten to cover it? Or had something removed it? Slowly, she turned toward the glass. Her reflection stared back, shrouded in shadow. A sense of unease crawled through her chest. She lifted a trembling hand and touched her cheek, watching as the reflection mimicked her every move. Relief washed over her. It was just her. Just a trick of the mind. But as she turned to grab the cover, a flicker in the glass made her freeze. The reflection hadn't turned with her. Her breath hitched. She whipped back to face the mirror. But her reflection stood still watching. Then it moved. Nour couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened as she stared at the glass, unable to move, unable to look away. Slowly, the reflection's lips curled into a grin. A wide, unnatural grin. Her own mouth remained frozen. A sharp jolt of panic surged through her. This wasn't possible. She took a step back. The reflection didn't. The grin stretched further, splitting its face in a way that wasn't human. Nour's knees nearly buckled as she reached for her phone, fingers fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The moment the light hit the mirror, the reflection snapped back to normal. Nour gasped, choking on a sob. Her own terrified face stared back at her, eyes wide with fear. Had she imagined it? She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing deep breaths. It was just exhaustion, just stress. But then, a sound slithered through the silence. A whisper. Nour. Her name drifted from the mirror like a breath of wind. Her stomach twisted. No. She didn't hear that. The voice was distant, hollow, yet painfully familiar like her own, but warped, as if spoken from deep underwater. Tears burned her eyes. The whisper came again, this time clearer. Nour, I see you. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the bed frame. Her pulse thundered in her ears. With a strangled gasp, she lunged for the fabric and threw it over the mirror. The whisper stopped, but something was still watching. She could feel it. And it wasn't done with her yet. Nour didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, eyes fixed on the covered mirror, heart hammering at every creak in the silence. By morning, she had convinced herself it was stress, exhaustion, anything but what it truly was. Still, unease lingered. She needed answers. She found her grandmother in the sunlit kitchen, brewing tea like every other morning. But when Nour mentioned the mirror, the warmth in the room seemed to drain away. Her grandmother's spoon clattered against the saucer. "You should leave it covered," she said, voice tight. Nour frowned. "Why?" "It's just a mirror." The old woman sighed, staring into her tea, as if searching for the right words. "That mirror has been in our family for generations. But it doesn't just reflect, it remembers." A chill trickled down Nour's spine. "Remembers what?" she whispered. Her grandmother hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "The ones it has taken." Nour wanted to believe her grandmother was just being superstitious, but as the days passed, the house felt different. The first time, it was small. She left her phone on the nightstand, only to find it on the dresser. She dismissed it as forgetfulness. Then, the whispering started. It wasn't always clear, just faint murmurs, like distant conversations slipping through the walls. Sometimes, she heard her own name. One night, as she crossed the hallway, the lights flickered. She swore she saw a shadow in the mirror, tall and unmoving, watching her as she passed. By the time she turned back, it was gone. Her nerves frayed. She avoided the mirror as much as possible, keeping it covered at all times. But it didn't matter. The feeling of being watched never left. Then, one evening, as she brushed her hair, something cold brushed her shoulder. A shudder ran down her spine. Slowly, she turned. The mirror was uncovered. The fabric lay crumpled on the floor. Her reflection was there, staring back. But it blinked a second too late. Night. Nour dreamed. In the dream, she stood before the mirror, but it was different, old, cracked, its surface rippling like disturbed water. And there, behind the glass, was a woman. Her face was gaunt, her dark eyes sunken and hollow. She pounded against the glass, her mouth moving, but no sound came out. Nour tried to step back, but something held her in place. The woman's eyes locked onto hers, and this time, she heard it. "Help me." The words were barely a whisper, but they rattled inside her skull like a scream. Nour jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The room was silent, but the dream clung to her like damp fog. She forced herself to breathe. It was just a nightmare, but as she shifted under the covers, her hand brushed against something cold. A shiver shot through her as she lifted the fabric. A single shard of mirror glass lay beside her on the bed. Her stomach lurched. She hadn't broken anything. Then, from the corner of the room, she heard it, a soft, slow tapping against the mirror. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, Nour searched for answers. Her grandmother refused to say more, warning her some things should not be uncovered. But Nour had to know. She dug through the old storage room, sifting through dusty books and yellowed papers. Finally, buried beneath forgotten trinkets, she found an old leather-bound journal. Her great-grandmother's handwriting filled the pages. The entries started normal, simple reflections of daily life. But then, the tone shifted. The mirror does not show what is real. It shows what it wants. I see her now, the woman in the glass. She watches me in my sleep. I covered the mirror, but it does not matter. She is still there. Nour's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Then, at the very end, one line stood alone, scrawled in frantic, shaking letters. "If you see your true self in the mirror, it's already too late." Her breath hitched. A sudden gust of wind slammed the storage door shut behind her. She spun around, heart hammering. And there, in the dusty reflection of a forgotten hand mirror, her reflection was smiling, but she wasn't. Nour barely ate, barely slept. The journal's final words looped in her mind like a curse. If you see your true self in the mirror, it's already too late. She tried to ignore the whispers, the shadows, the unbearable sensation that something was watching, but the mirror wouldn't let her. That night, she bolted upright at the sound of glass tapping. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly, her gaze flickered to the corner of the room. The fabric covering the mirror was gone. Her reflection stood there, watching, its hands pressed against the glass. Nour's stomach twisted. She squeezed her eyes shut. It isn't real. It isn't real. Then, The whisper came. "Let me out." Nour refused to look. She stumbled from the bed, nearly tripping in her rush to escape the room. But the moment she reached for the door, the voice changed. Soft, fragile, familiar. "Nour, help me." Her breath caught in her throat. It was her mother's voice. A sob clawed at her chest. This wasn't possible. Her mother had died years ago. But the voice was exactly the same, gentle, pleading. Slowly, she turned back. Her reflection was gone. In its place stood her mother, eyes hollow, hands pressed against the glass. Tears welled in Nour's eyes. "Mama?" The figure nodded, eyes glistening. "I've been trapped for so long, Habibdi. Please break the glass. Let me out." Nour's hand trembled as she reached forward. But just as her fingertips brushed the surface, her mother's face contorted. Her soft features twisted into something monstrous, mouth stretching too wide, eyes sinking into darkness. The thing slammed its hands against the glass, shrieking. Nour screamed, stumbling back, knocking over a lamp. Light flickered, the mirror rippled, and then, in a blink, her own reflection returned, standing exactly as she was. The only difference? It was still smiling. Nour couldn't stay in that room. She ran. To the hallway. The kitchen. Anywhere but near that thing. Tears burned her eyes as she fumbled through the old journal again, scanning the frantic words for something that could explain what was happening. Then she found it. A name? The Soul Mirror. Her great-grandmother had written about it in terrified, broken sentences. It was not meant for beauty. It was meant for binding. A soul trapped in glass is a soul that never dies. If the mirror chooses you, you are already lost. Nour's breath hitched. The mirror wasn't just haunted. It was alive. Her great-grandmother had tried to destroy it. She had failed. And now, it had chosen Nour. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The temperature plummeted. From the hallway, a soft voice drifted through the silence. "You can't run, Nour." Her heart stopped. It was her own voice. Nour needed answers. She didn't trust the internet. Didn't trust books. She needed someone who understood. So she sought out Dr. Tariq Ismail, an Egyptian historian specializing in cursed artifacts. His office was dim, cluttered with relics from centuries past. As soon as she mentioned the mirror, his expression darkened. "You should not have looked into it," he muttered. Nour clenched her fists. "I didn't have a choice." Dr. Tariq sighed, rubbing his temples. "The soul mirror is not just a relic. It is a prison, but only for those it chooses." She swallowed hard. "What happens to them?" His gaze was heavy. "They vanish. Their bodies remain, but their souls become reflections." A shiver crawled up her spine. Dr. Tariq hesitated before adding, "And once you see your true self, it's already too late." Nour's breath caught. That's what the journal had said. That's what the whisper had repeated. "How do I stop it?" she demanded. Dr. Tariq hesitated. "There is only one way." He leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "You must shatter the glass before it takes your soul." Nour's heart pounded. She had to do it. She had to destroy the mirror. Before it destroyed her, Nour stood before the mirror, hammer clenched in her trembling hands. The room felt wrong air thick, shadows stretching in unnatural ways. Her reflection stared back, unblinking. She tightened her grip. One strike. That's all it takes. But as she raised the hammer, her reflection stepped forward. Nour froze. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It moved independently, mirroring nothing. Slowly, It placed a hand against the glass. "You can't destroy me," it whispered, voice smooth, eerily familiar. Nour's breath hitched. The reflection tilted its head, studying her like a predator. "You're afraid. You should be." She shook her head. "You're not real." The reflection smiled. "Then why do I know your thoughts?" Nour's blood ran cold. It began mimicking her fears. Her mother's voice, the shadows stretching closer, the cold wrapping around her throat. "You belong to me now," it whispered. Then, with one final step, the reflection reached through the glass. Nour screamed. Icy fingers wrapped around her wrist, yanking her toward the mirror. She fought, twisting, struggling, but the grip was impossibly strong. The glass rippled like water, and then she was pulled inside. Darkness swallowed her whole. She landed, with a sickening thud, on a cold, blackened floor. The air smelled of dust and decay. The world inside the mirror was distorted, warped walls, shifting shadows, and a chilling silence. A whisper slithered through the air. "You shouldn't have looked, Nour." She spun around. Her reflection stood there, but it was no longer just a copy. It had her face, her voice, her memories. But its eyes weren't hers. It stepped forward. "Now, I'll take your place." Nour's stomach twisted. "No." The thing lunged at her. Nour dodged, sprinting through the warped space, searching for an escape. But there were only mirrors. Endless mirrors. Each one showed different versions of herself. Some screaming, some laughing, some empty, trapped souls. Her pulse thundered. This is what the mirror does. It steals. It replaces. She had to stop it. She had to get out. The whispers grew louder. The trapped souls called her name. Then she saw them women, just like her. Their faces were familiar, yet faded, lost to time. Nour's heart pounded. Her ancestors. "We were chosen," one of them whispered. "We fought, but the mirror always wins." "No," Nour breathed. "It can't. It won't." But the voices swarmed her mind. "It feeds on fear. It knows your weaknesses. You cannot escape." Her reflection appeared again, stepping forward. "You see, Nour?" It smirked. "This is where you belong." The air turned suffocating. The mirror's curse was centuries old. It had trapped every woman in her bloodline, but she refused to be next. She clenched her fists. There had to be a way out. And then she saw it. Among the mirrors, one stood cracked. A single deep fracture down the center. A weakness. The reflection's smirk faltered. It followed her gaze in for the first time, its face twisted in fear. Nour lunged. She slammed her fists against the fractured glass. The mirror shuddered. The whispers screamed. But Nour didn't stop. She grabbed a shard from the floor and drove it into the crack. The mirror exploded. Light blinded her. A deafening shatter shook the air. And then silence. When Nour opened her eyes, she was back in her room. The mirror lay in ruins. Shards of glass scattered across the floor, reflecting her trembling frame. The whispers were gone. She gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. She was alive. She had won. A shaky laugh escaped her lips. It was over. It was finally over. She turned toward the door, and then, in the corner of her eye, something moved. Nour's breath caught. Slowly she looked down. At the shards. Her reflection was still there, and it was smiling. Nour stumbled backward, heart hammering. The mirror was gone-shattered into 1,000 pieces. She gasped for air, gripping the edge of her dresser for support. The room felt normal again. No whispers, no shadows moving in the corners. She had done it. The curse was broken. With shaking hands, she grabbed a towel and carefully gathered the larger shards, throwing them into a box. She'd get rid of them tomorrow far away from here. But as she turned to leave, a faint chill ran down her spine. Something felt wrong. She looked down. Scattered across the floor, in the largest shard of glass, her reflection still stared back, and then slowly blinked. Nour did not. She staggered away from the shards, breath caught in her throat. No, this wasn't possible. She had broken the mirror. She had won, hadn't she? Tears burned her eyes. She squeezed them shut, forcing herself to breathe. It's over. It's over. A deep silence settled over the room. Thin, quiet giggle. Her blood ran cold. She turned, slowly, toward her dresser, toward the mirror's remains. A single piece of glass shifted, and then the whisper, "See you soon, Nour," she screamed. 3 days later, Nour walked past a shop window downtown. The city bustled around her, cars honking, voices blending into the warm Cairo air. Normal. Safe. But as she passed the glass storefront, something caught her eye. Her reflection. It stood still, too still. And then, just as she turned away, it smiled. But she didn't.